Can people hear us? Ooh, I need a way to see the chat. All right, I can see everyone. All right. Good morning. I see you guys are talking in the chat now. I can see everybody. Ooh, feedback. Okay, let me figure that out. Kaylee, help me. All right, I have all right, you 11 out there. I cannot see the chat, so Kaylee, if you have ideas, I'm open. But I'm going to get started. I'm going to say good morning because it's good morning where I am, but I know all of you are around the world, so good afternoon and good evening. We're going to be live here today interviewing one of my favorite Messians on the creative team, but you know, they're all my favorite. So, but she's a great artist and a delightful person. I have to tell a very brief story. When I first started seeing Divyam's work, she was doing cartoon drawings on lined notebook paper. And I was immediately thrown back to middle school because I had a friend who also did those kinds of drawings on lined paper. And so I was sort of predisposed to enjoy Divyam herself and then her work. So she is a delightful comic artist as well as a fine artist. She makes beautiful work. She and I have collaborated on a couple of different projects, so she's a lot of fun to work with personally. And then she's also a storyteller. She's a yoga practitioner. She has a beautiful, melodic, soothing voice that we all get really excited when she does her videos for the creative team because her voice is just lovely and soothing and makes you feel all special and happy and safe. So I'm going to introduce Divyam. Divyam, it is lovely to have you here today. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's really lovely to be here.
Well, we'll get started with our first big question, which is, of course, always, tell us a little bit about your creative journey, how you got started.
Well, I can't remember too much about what I was doing creatively when I was a kid, but I do remember being a teenager and making these hilarious comic stories. I did this whole series of kind of watercolor comic stories that were basically a mashup of all the TV I was watching at the time, which was Dallas, Agatha Christie. And the plots were just ridiculous. Everyone was getting murdered and coming back to life and trying to steal each other's oil fortunes. It was just brilliant. So I really enjoyed doing that. And I was also painting T-shirts and for me and my friends and wearing them around. And yeah, I didn't really think too much about it. That's sort of just what I did. And then it came to art class in school and exams and having to fulfill certain obligations to kind of pass your exams. And I just couldn't fit in. Still life, you know, we had to do still life, like draw the bottle and the fruit and everything. I just couldn't do it. So I dropped it as a subject. And the whole kind of visual art thing went kind of underground. But I carried on my creative journey through performing. I went to drama school. I did lots of dance. I did lots of clowning, you know, everything very expressive. But when I came out of drama school, I didn't get so much work as an actress, but I got lots of work as a storyteller, so which I really, really enjoyed. So I just followed that path. And I was a storyteller for many years, and I just fell in love with stories. And I also love the fact that when you're telling a story, you can be all the different characters. I just love, you can be the witch and the princess and the valiant warrior and the monster and all that. And at the same time, I was working as a therapist counselor. So I was working with people on their inner stories. I didn't realize it at the time, but that was the bit that I loved the most. And I think these two things have sort of stayed with me, this sort of outer expression, but also the stories that are inside. And I sort of dropped out of the performing side and went into writing stories some years ago. I did an MA in writing science fiction and fantasy, which was so much fun. All our reading was stuff like Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings, and it was fantastic. And so I was writing stories and poetry, and then on the side, unofficially, I was doing cartoons again. They sort of crept back in. And I never, for a long time, I didn't really take it seriously. It was on the side. And it was also, I didn't show anyone. It was really private. I was doing cartoons. It was kind of cartoon therapy. Like if something was bothering me, I drew a cartoon, really, really basic cartoon with stick figures. And it would make me feel better. Like if I was nervous about something, I would do a little cartoon and it would sort of resolve itself in the cartoon. And every now and again, I would show them to like a trusted good friend who I felt safe to show them with. And they were like, I can totally relate to that. Oh my goodness, I feel like that too. And I started to feel a desire to share my cartoons, but I didn't want to share my personal worries and anxieties, and I didn't know what to do. So I started writing a cartoon about a fictional character called Mythology Girl, who I felt safe to share her story. And it's actually still online if you want to check it out. I wrote this sort of story as I was going along about Mythology Girl and her adventures. And it was another way of telling my own story, but it felt less personal. Mm-hmm. And then something happened a few years ago where I suddenly dived headlong into the cartooning and the comics, and it wasn't a sideline anymore. I came across a woman called Linda Barry, who is like my rock star writer, artist, hero. And I got hold of a book of hers called Syllabus, which is my desert island book. And I basically worked through this book page by page and really went into the cartooning and the comics. And it sort of became the main thing from having been on the sidelines. And that's what I was doing for a good couple of years until a good friend of mine told me about Get Messy. And at the time, I didn't know what art journaling was. And I couldn't quite connect with it. And also I felt a bit nervous around art materials. You know, I was used to my black Uniball pen and my lined paper in my composition notebook, and that was it. So I was a little unsure about that. But then when I was looking on the Get Messy site, I saw Vanessa's course, Totems. And I was so attracted to this class because it was all about your inner world, which I was kind of fascinated by. And I thought, wow, if this is art journaling, I want to do it. So I started Vanessa's class. From my first art journaling page, I just fell in love. And I think I joined Get Messy like a week or two later. And yeah, there was just an explosion of creativity that happened after that point. A whole world opened up. And I was a little bit nervous because, I mean, actually my cartoon characters were nervous. They started talking to me in the cartoons. I was thinking, no, don't leave us behind, you know, take us with you. And I was actually quite nervous because I, you know, as I've just described in my journey, I've done a lot of different things. And I think there was some part of me that was like, you're going to leave us behind. We're never going to see you again. There's going to be no more cartoons. And I remember I said something like this in the Totems group, and Ellie Mack was so helpful. She sent me an art journaling comic that she had made, and she said, it's all possible. You don't have to leave anything behind. And that was the final thing that I needed to take the leap. And I'm actually finding, you know, for a while I did drop comics and cartoons, but now I'm finding it's all creeping back in, the storytelling, the cartoons, the writing, like it's all possible, which I'm quite relieved about.
I was going to say, your 100-day project has pulled that in. Just, it's beautiful the way you've incorporated those kinds of things in your storytelling and in the comics. It's all there. It's all there.
I mean, that's one of the things I found so enjoyable about this project. That it's brought all these threads in more than anything that I've done over the last year and a half. And it's such a nice feeling to be telling a story again. And I'm almost tempted, I'm not going to do it because it's not within what this project, but I'm almost tempted to do little speech bubbles. You know, it's so close to being a cartoon graphic novel feel, but it does feel like, you know, I'm back to my black pen.
Right.
So that feels absolutely wonderful. And yeah, so nice to know that you don't have to throw anything away of the things that you care about.
Yeah, your 100-day project, you and I have talked about your 100-day project before, during, there's, you know, we've had a lot of conversation around this project. So I'm completely invested in how it works out. I saw you on Instagram the other day say that when you started, you didn't have a clear end point, but that things have developed in such a way that you can see the end. Maybe not how you're going to get there, but you know roughly what your end is going to be. So I'm excited to see how you pull it all together. And my heart's desire is that at the end you're going to, you know, read it storybook style and do a video. So not only can we see your work, but also hear you read it. So I'm really looking forward to that. That project it's one of my favorites that anyone has ever done. It's just delightful.
Thank you so much. Mm-hmm. I'm loving it, and I'm definitely going to do that video of me reading it for sure, just for you.
I'm such an art director. I'm like talking to her on Slack. I'm like, okay, so you need to do this, and then you need to do this, and then you need to do this, and she's like, all right, Misty, enough. Like, that's all awesome.
No, I'm totally into it.
So yeah, it's gonna be a neat finished piece, and something, you know, I don't think any of us ever start out to say, I'm going to have this piece that's going to be a big part of my portfolio. But for you, I see that work being a huge part of your portfolio, to say, you know, this is a project that came out of the 100-day work, but then it's this finished book, right? You have this completed book. So yeah, it's pretty perfect.
It's funny because when I started it, I was thinking, no, don't do another thing, because I already felt so full with the daily art and the season that I was in and all the different classes, and everything inside my head was going, you do not need another challenge or another thing. But I really wanted to do it. And the funny thing is that it's sort of taken over and pushed everything else to the side. This has become the most important thing. And you just never know what that thing is going to be. You know, I just started thinking, okay, I'll just do this thing every day for 100 days. And now it's almost like the story exists in its own right. And I just have to do my best to follow it. But it's got its own life now. So
I find that really fascinating with artists, that we seem to be a little bit, we tend to be rabbit chasers. we go, oh, I'm gonna try this thing and see what happens, and then 100 days later you have a completed book, right? Like that's how that works.
Yeah, and it's the same with Get Messy. I'll just sign up for this class. And now it's like of such huge importance in my life and just brings so much richness. But I guess every important thing starts like that. You meet the love of your life like that. Mm-hmm. You're just standing there at a party eating peanuts.
Right.
And then your whole life changes.
Right. No, that's awesome. It's so good. It makes me so happy. Let's see. Oh, here's a good one. You've talked about this a little bit, but sort of dive into it. Talk about your creative process. Do you have a ritual to get started? How do you go about setting up your making space? What goes into all of that?
I mean, most of the time, the important thing is just that I'm in my own space. So when I'm at home, I'm in what I'm starting to call my studio. It did used to be my office. I close the door. Normally there's a bit of an announcement beforehand. I'm going to do some art now. I'm not going to be available for a bit. I have to sort of like energetically create the space where I can get in touch with something. And I sit at my desk and open my journal, and a lot of the time I put music on just to help me get into a zone or in my own space. Also, practically, someone's mowing the lawn, or there's a phone conversation going on. I get really pulled out by sound. Mm-hmm. So I sort of use the music like as a kind of trees in a forest around the castle or something. And actually, the number of times I've caught myself with my headphones in and I forgot to turn the music on. There's just something about putting the headphones in. Mm-hmm. That really does something. And then I just start. A lot of the time there'll be a prompt or a tutorial or a class that I'm following. Or sometimes I've got a desire to express a certain feeling I've been having. And so I just start somehow. I'll write across the page, even if I cover it up later. I'll mush paint around the page, just something to kind of get my hands moving. And then the next thing just sort of comes to me. In terms of rituals, the only other thing I do, which I'm not sure why I do this, at the end when I'm finished, I tidy my whole desk up and put everything away. Because I want to come to it again the next day like a clean slate. I mean, I might leave my journal open so I can look at the page that I just did, because otherwise it's just sort of closed away and I don't get to look at it again. Or if I'm still in process with it, I just leave it open so I can pop in and go, oh, yeah, maybe this, maybe that. So that's the only other ritual thing I do. And then on Sundays, I go to a cafe in the park, which I've called the Doodle Cafe. So it is now the Doodle Cafe forever. And I sit there for a couple of hours. So that's with people around. So it's very different. And I really like that too. Mm-hmm. And I like that interactive quality. I mean, sometimes it's just so lovely, the conversations that start up just because I'm sitting there. It's almost like an invitation. Which was different than when I was writing. That was more, if you walk past and someone's working on something, it immediately jumps into your eyes. And I love it when kids come up to me. And this one girl the other week, she came up to me and showed me a picture that her mum pulled up on their phone of the drawing she did with her grandmother. And it was just the most lovely conversation in the world. And I was like, I want to give her something. I got a napkin and kind of painted her name on the napkin. And she was just so thrilled. And her mum was like, thank you. Like it was just so lovely. So I really like that too, also. Somehow being around people, but also being in my own space.
I love creating in public. Typically when I'm creating in public, I'm doing crochet, but there's something about handwork that invites people to come and interact with you. They want to know what you're doing. They want to know what you're making. They want to know, you know, lots of people say, are you knitting? Well, and I'm like, no, this is crochet. Here are the differences. But I love that interaction because it breaks down so many barriers as far as generations. You know, I have lovely conversations with these little old ladies, you know, and kids want to know what I'm making. When you have a ball of string and a stick, it's like, what are you doing? So I just love creating in public because it does generate so much interaction with people, and people want to come and sort of participate in some way. And that's delightful to me. So I love that you take your art to the cafe and you get those interactions. It's so good.
Yeah, and also I think it was in Kiala Givehand's one of her blog posts. She was talking about how she bumped into a woman in a cafe and found out what art journaling was that way. And when I read that sort of added to that value I already had on those interactions. And I thought, you never know.
You never know
what it will open up. So we'll never know, but that's very exciting.
It's so fun. So talk a little bit about how you fill your inspiration well. Do you get stuck, and what do you do to get unstuck?
Inspiration it's kind of interesting because, I mean, one of the things that greatly inspires me is looking at other artists on Instagram and online. And that's one of the many wonderful things from being in Get Messy. Just the amount of different expressions around similar themes is just, it really is eye-opening. Oh, wow, you could do it like this, or you could do it like that. So that's really inspiring. But I find sometimes if I just have online inspiration, the circuits in my brain start getting overloaded. So I really like to look at things in print. It's different. I don't know why, but I can somehow absorb what I'm seeing differently. So I love reading books and magazines also. And if there's an artist I particularly like with Linda Barry, I was so, I think I just drank, I drank Linda Barry like a huge nutritious smoothie. I read every comic she'd done and everything I could get my hands on. So there's that kind of inspiration, which I find really valuable. And then I also get inspired from things which nourish my own experience, because at the end of the day, like the images that are coming out onto the pages of my art journal are coming from my experience somehow, or my inner world. So things which give me those experiences, that's the best inspiration. For example, last year I did a women's training, a women's workshop in a beautiful forest, the Forest of Dean in England. And we did so many wonderful things, and we were sitting around the fire and dancing, and we were in the forest. And I found during that year that images would pop into my mind while I was experiencing it. And I then had to get home and let me show you one, actually. The first time we went into the forest, I was lying on the earth of the forest, and that might be a normal thing to do for some people, but I've been such a city girl my whole life that for me it was just like this incredible experience. And I was,
but it's dirt.
I know. I think I might have been on a rug. I'm not sure if I was directly on the earth. I could have been. And
you were very close to the earth.
I was incredibly close, much closer than I normally am in London. And I had this image of me lying on the earth, but then also being this goddess or ancient woman in the earth who was kind of reaching up for me, and we were both connecting with each other.
Oh my gosh, you're going to show this. I love this. I love this so much.
I think this is one of my favorite pieces because it came directly out of an experience, which for me, that's like the best kind of inspiration. And is sort of pretty much what I felt like. You know, it didn't look like this from the outside. I was wearing my kind of duffel coat and a woolly hat, but it felt like this, you know.
I just love all the connectedness in that piece. I love, it's just perfect. Just the trees, the bottoms of the trees and the roots, and then you and the Earth Lady are rooted to each other. It's just delightful. Hey, your hair is perfect.
Yeah, hair, I mean, that's like an important, often I've got kind of like flying away curly whirly hair. And there's something also about doing those, making pictures from that kind of inspiration, making that kind of picture from
just, you know, do the thing. So it's just doing your usual thing.
That now when I look at those pieces that have come out of that experience, it's like I have it forever. I mean, maybe I would have had it forever anyway, but it connects me again and again with that experience. It's better than a photo, you know.
Right, because you've taken the time to think through it and you've processed it a little bit and then you've put it on paper. And then, yeah, you reconnect to it every time you look at it. So, yeah, I would definitely say it's better than a photo, because a photo is just a reproduction of what is, and this is an expression of your interior life. So, yeah, absolutely better than a photo.
Yeah.
And I remember when you made that piece, and I just thought that is, and I didn't know all the story behind it. So to hear all the story about it, behind it, makes it even better. But I just remember thinking that is amazing what you've made. So good job, you.
Thank you.
Let's see. What would you tell a beginner? What tips do you have for beginners?
Well, the first thing I would say is keep showing up. Just keep doing your thing, whatever it is, whatever you're beginning. Just begin it and just keep showing up. And it doesn't have to take long. It doesn't have to be, oh, I must have an hour every day. When I was teaching myself more about the cartooning, I was following this practice from Linda Barry that was a 4-minute diary.
Nice.
And it is so brilliant. She's got a video of it on YouTube, so everyone can access it. It was absolutely brilliant. You just listed a few things, and you then had 30 seconds to draw a picture, which is, I would also say this, if you're beginning, actually less time is probably better than more time. Because if you've got less time, I think your expectations of, oh, it must be fantastic, are also less. And in 30 seconds, I mean, most people are not going to be drawing some masterpiece. So it totally takes the pressure off. So I would say spend less time if you're starting out. If it turns into more time by itself, then that's great. I'd also say there's something really great about working in a book. So that could be an art journal, or I was working in a composition book when I was doing the cartooning, because I think there's something when you're just starting out, it's easy to dismiss what you're doing. Maybe because the volume of what you've done is smaller, you don't have like a whole stack of work that you've done. And also you might think, oh, it's not so great or whatever. But if you do it in a book, there's just no denying the stack. It's building up. It's like the energy and the presence and the time is there, evidence, in the form of a book. And what's also great about it is you can see your progress. You can see where you started out, and you can see your journey, which is wonderful to see. 20 pages later, you're not doing the same thing you were doing on the first page. The other thing I'd say is to do with trusting yourself. There's just so much to learn and so much to do, and so much, there's just so much out there. So I think an anchor is to trust what you're drawn to. Like if your thing is drawing cats, follow that. Don't think, oh, but I should be drawing landscapes, and draw cats, like, and do it for as long as you love it, because the whole thing that brings you to want to do it in the first place is your enjoyment and your love of what you're doing. So I would say trust what you want to do, even if it seems really strange and no one else is doing it. That's even better. That is so good. Just trust that. And also trust what you bring with you, because it's easy to think, oh, you know, I'm new to this, and almost kind of wipe the slate a bit too clean. But we're all coming from some kind of experience, and that's really valuable. So I don't know, it could be knitting, it could be writing, it could be cooking, it could be all sorts of things. It could be scrapbooking, all, you know, many different things you could bring to your art, and let that come with you. A bit like me with my comics. That's a something. And the other thing that I would add is, maybe this is just me, but I don't think anyone's a beginner, because we all start out as makers and artists and creators, and maybe somewhere along the line someone hit the pause button. Could be you, could be a teacher, could be just necessity of other things getting in the way, but that's there too. It just needs to be reawakened, I would say. So yeah, beginner, not beginner. I don't know.
I love your emphasis on trusting yourself, because so much of what my practice has involved has been shutting off the inner critic, and trusting yourself is the flip side of that, right?
Absolutely.
So it's the positive framing of, instead of turning off your inner critic, it's trusting the part of yourself that knows, whatever the thing is, that you are going to know it when you get there. So I love that. I've just never thought of it that way. So that's really delightful that that's your approach to it. It's really good.
I mean, and it's almost like, you know, the inner critic kind of feeds off our energy that could be going into actually doing the stuff.
Right.
So when you actually trust yourself and you start doing the stuff, it's almost like the inner critic, the battery runs down, kind of shuts off. It doesn't have the energy, you know?
Yeah. As Kaylee would say, you're so wise.
Oh.
I love it when she says that to me. I always feel like, oh, look at that, I'm so wise. So I'll say it to you now. You're so wise.
Oh, thank you.
The next part of that is what tips you have. How do you go from beginner to expert? But you've sort of talked about that. You feel like everybody's a bit of an expert.
Well, I do want to add something to that. I feel like everyone's an expert, and I feel like, you know, I don't know if you've seen, it's done the rounds online, and loads of people quoted it. I can't remember who it was. I think it was a musician who was like 95, and he was still practicing every day, and he was like a famous, amazing musician. And someone said, well, you know, why do you keep practicing? And he said, you know, I feel like I'm just starting to get somewhere. And I just love that, because I think, you know, this thing of beginner to expert, in a way, I think we should all keep the beginner freshness, because if you reach a point where you ever think of yourself as an expert, something's probably missing. I think expert is kind of there just to give you a direction. But I think this kind of seeing yourself as a beginner and bringing that freshness to it, I think you should always have that. Like, don't ever get rid of it. And I would also say, you know, even if you feel like you've become really good at something, just keep learning, because I don't know, otherwise what's the point?
Right. Well, you just, you know, as you chase the rabbit, you go, oh, I'm going to work over here for a little while. And so you learn some about this new thing. And yeah, I agree with him. Like you just feel like even when you've got some experience under your belt, you discover all the things you don't know. And so you can say, yeah, I'm just starting out. Like I'm just getting started in this new thing.
Yeah. I mean, also the other thing that I would add is, again, this is like a trusting yourself thing. But I think it's also important to, at some point, ask yourself, if I was to become really good at something or an expert in something, what is it that I actually want to be an expert in? Because it may not be what you think. For example, for myself, I'm not that drawn to kind of learning how to do something properly. It's a bit like that drawing the bottle and the fruit in art school. It just sends me into a panic and I just want to break out and kind of like splodge lots of colors all over it or whatever. But what I am interested in is expressing something of what matters to me. And then learning the techniques makes sense because it's almost like if I'm wanting to speak my language, and maybe we all have our own language we want to speak, then the techniques become like expanding your vocabulary of how you can do that. So then that then becomes really interesting because it's serving this what really matters to me anyway.
You're so wise.
What's the line I have to say to that?
What? Thank you. I mean, I don't know.
Thank you. I feel like I need a wise line to say. Yeah.
Well, of course, we have to ask Courtney's favorite question. What's your supply kit? What are your favorite tools that you use?
Well, the bottom line is some kind of paint and some kind of pens. And what that normally means is acrylic paints and permanent pens, because if I start playing around with things that don't behave when other things get put on top of them, I just get into trouble. So the more permanent and fixed, the better. But when I go to the Doodle Cafe or if I'm traveling, then I normally take watercolors just because I don't need, I can have like a little water brush. I don't need to make a mess and have loads of tubes and everything. So, yeah, I mean, I guess that sounds kind of boring, paint and pens. But within that, there's paint and there's paint, which I'm starting to learn how many different kinds of acrylic paint there are. It's mind-boggling. My favorite at the moment is the heavy body acrylic paint, just because it's nice and thick and lays down some really good color. But I recently got some liquid acrylics and some high flow acrylics, but I haven't really figured out what to do with them yet, so I don't use them as much. They come out for little special outings every now and again. So yeah, just acrylic paint and pens. Posca pens are really good because they're permanent, and things like the Uniball pens. This is probably like my desert island art supply, is this pen.
You can draw on palm trees with that.
Exactly, and you can draw on yourself if you don't have paper. You're sorted. Searching a little bit for, I remember talking to Courtney about this on one hangout, like the search for the perfect white pen.
It's the holy grail.
Ongoing. It's the holy grail. I've tried so many. I'm actually at the moment, I'm trying a Pitt big brush white pen. Oh. And that seems to be the most opaque, chunky marker permanent that I found. So that's worth a try. Yeah, those are my favorites are the tried and trusted old favorites.
Well, if it works for you, then, and it allows you to express yourself in the way that you want, then that's what you should use.
Yeah.
Do you feel like your art reflects your personality?
I think it does. In fact, I wish when I was at a party making small talk, I could just hold up my journal and kind of go this.
Make your own thought bubble.
Yeah. It's like I can talk about all bits and pieces, but actually this is who I am. I do feel though, I remember I had this when I was doing my writing. I was doing these cute little cartoons, and then the stuff I was writing was like dark science fiction, fantasy stuff. And I remember I would read my stuff out in class, and the same people who had seen some of my cartoons were like, "Who are you? Like, we're actually scared right now hearing your story." You know, so I've had these sort of two sides going on. One is sort of light and bright and a bit funny, and the other being a bit more broody and dark and mysterious. And I feel like with my art journaling, those two have come closer together, but there's still a little bit two sides. But maybe that's all right. I don't know. Maybe there'll always be two sides, but at least they're both there.
I was going to say, you're expressing yourself, and some days that's lighter and brighter, and some days that's darker and heavier, depending on what your internal landscape looks like. So I don't really have a problem with that.
Yeah.
I always feel the same, like when I meet people and they're making small talk, and I'm like, can I just show you some work that I have? Like, I feel like we could skip a little bit of this if I could just, and then I show the people my abstract stuff, and they're like, what is that? And I'm like, well, it's just who I am. And they're like, what is that?
But I think that's one of the things, I mean, again, many things I've enjoyed about being in the Get Messy community, but this feeling like when we finally meet on a video hangout, or when we meet in person, where it's like, oh, we know each other already. It's because we've been communicating who we are all the time with our art. And I just think it's an amazing form of communication, because it cuts through hours and hours of, oh, so tell me, where have you been? What have you been doing? You just get like an instant download of what someone really cares about. I love that. I think, next time I have a party, we're just gonna show each other pages. Yeah.
Well, speaking of books, why don't you show us some work?
Sure. Okay. Well, this book here, I think, is my favorite because it was my first art journal. And at one point I was just in this one book. And I'll just show you this page where it started. Actually, years before I was doing art journaling, I bought this book, and I bought some watercolor tubes, and I painted this picture of someone looking down at their body, probably me. And I was so blown away afterwards that I thought, what is that? I had nowhere to put it because I wasn't doing any art. I wasn't even cartooning at the time. So I put the book away and only took it out when I started the totems class. So when I came back at the end, this is an imprint of my foot, just to kind of, this page was blank, just to sort of show the whole journey that I had been on. This one is another one of my favorites. It came out of Pam Garrison when she was our guest artist, where you do all this stuff and then you see what emerges. That says, am I weak or strong? How will I know? I love that one. A little bit of cartoons creeping in. We were having our house renovated for a couple of years, so that was me kind of sheltering from all the drilling and banging. This is another one of my favorites, where I think I was doing a course with Juliana Coles, her online course, Intro to Art Journaling. And I think the prompt was to do with what is home to you. And I don't know if you can see, there's all this writing. I just wrote across the whole page just different stream of consciousness of what is home. And somewhere along the way, this image came in the writing about a girl who carried a house inside her. So then that's what I drew on top of the page. And that's still something I do when I'm not sure what I want to do on the page, is I'll write on the page and see what comes as I'm writing. But yeah, this is one of my favorites. And this one kind of expresses how I feel about art. This is a fun collage piece. This is another one of my favorites. I guess this is that humorous side.
Right. And it's really funny to me looking back, because I remember you making these pages, and I didn't, at the time, had no idea that these were some of your first pages.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was, I can remember actually, this was in April, and I think I only joined Get Messy in February. Yeah. It was National Poetry Month, so I took on this task of trying to write a poem every day, but make that an art journaling page too. So this was the poem all about laundry.
I like how you're not afraid to just like dive in and do big stuff, like a poem a day and a page a day. Like, sure, we'll just knock that out, you know.
Well, the rest of my life kind of basically stopped for that month, but I had to do it because every year for the previous 3 or 4 years, I had done this poetry challenge, just writing straight poetry. And it was again this feeling of, you know, my inner poet going, don't leave me, you know, don't desert me for art journaling. So I was like, okay, you know, everyone has to come to the party.
Get in the car, come on.
Exactly. This is again to do with the house renovation. This is one of my favorites, Action Man and Space Woman. That's basically me and my husband trying to build a house together. See, this is what I mean by therapy. This is therapy. Oh, and this is one of my favorites from, you know, when we were doing our whole cave painting exploration together. This, which is called Cave Wall, I had never, until we were doing that exploration, I had never worked with brown.
Me neither.
Yeah.
Me neither.
And then working with a color you're not used to working with, you do stuff you're not used to doing, right?
Right.
So, for example, no words, no pictures, just cave. So
that looks surprisingly like what I make all the time. So.
Yeah, maybe I was getting influenced by your, you know, because we were looking at each other's stuff very closely. So your more abstract way of working totally helped me.
Well, and you know, I don't ever draw anything, but my cave pictures have drawings, right? So you influenced me.
Isn't that amazing? I love that. Mm-hmm. Here's another one without words. You see, this was me going, what do you do with high flow acrylics? Let's have a play. So that's what came out of this. Oh, and this is one of my favorites. This was from the season of fairy tales.
Wow.
And I liked it because it kind of wasn't about any particular fairy tale, but it just sort of had this fairy tale feel of being on a journey deep in the forest. Yeah, I like her.
That's lovely.
And then I'm not sure how to show this. This is like the end of the book. You know, in the moleskin, they've got this like back folder. Mm-hmm. So I thought, oh, that would make a good flap. And then I made a flap on the other side and kind of made it like a medieval, I don't know how you pronounce it. I think they're called triptych. Mm-hmm. You know, I've seen them in exhibitions sometimes. There's normally 3. I did 4. And they're all like different ages of women.
Yeah, they look like icons.
Yeah, like icons with the gold. So there was me thinking, oh, I've only got 1 more page to do of my journal. It took like days and days and ended up.
I was going to say, I have one more page, but I'm going to make it the biggest flipping page I can manage.
Exactly. What else can I show? This is another one that came out of like that inner, seeing something. When I was this was in that cave painting time that we had. But also when I was on that women's training, I just had this image of these wise old women sitting around a fire, even though there is no fire there, but they're kind of all a bit lit up, just being wise. And so I came home and they appeared in my journal. And actually these same women have reappeared in my 100-day project, sitting around the fire. They're the grandmothers. So I love that as well, when like an image comes from deep inside and it's got more than one page to do. Like it keeps reappearing. I love it when that happens.
I like because you've done cartooning for so long, you have developed your own symbology. And so you do have these reoccurring figures throughout your work they're like seeing old friends. Like when one comes up, like I saw those women from your cave painting come up in your 100-day project. And I was like, oh, here they are again.
Yeah, they're like old friends.
They really are. So the fact that you now have a body of work where you have started seeing those recurring characters that's really powerful. That, I don't know, it really speaks to something to me, a depth of thought, a depth of development that I'm not sure my own work has. So I am completely entranced with it in your work.
Thank you. I feel a bit like, I'm very interested in this. One of the reasons why I love art, making art, and art journaling is because of this connection with something beneath the surface in myself. That's almost like a bit like an underground river. So you're kind of going through your life, you're doing the things and whatever, but there's this underground river all the time that has things like these women are part of that, and the woman under the earth is part of that, and they're kind of what makes things rich. And then when I sit down, it's almost like, that feeling when you have a really good dream and you wake up in the morning and you feel like you just connected with something beneath the surface of yourself. And it's a nice feeling. It's like, wow, there's something satisfying about it. So I feel like that with the art journal a bit. It's almost like you do something on the page, you kind of think you're in charge, but it's kind of got its own life. And it's like you've just had a dream and then you get to see it afterwards. It's like, oh, I just dreamed this. And then like the photo, you have that dream forever and you can dive back into it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's really amazing. Let's see if I have any more questions on my list I want to ask. We've talked about so many things.
We have.
Kaylee, are there questions from the audience that we need to answer? Oh, here's a great one. How do you find time to make things?
I think a really important thing, sometimes I'm not busy and I just have time. But when I am busy and it feels like I don't have time, I think a really important thing is actually remembering it doesn't have to take a lot of time. Because I don't know why, but I just get into this thought that, oh, well, I don't have 3 hours, so I won't do it. And that's just crazy. So I remember a couple of weeks ago, I was in the middle of a month of travel and I was like, oh, I don't really have time. And I realized the amount of time it was taking to say that I could have done something. So I was like, okay, 5 minutes. I'm going to do something in 5 minutes. I'll show you what I did. And I just ripped up some paper from my stash, got a Pritt stick, no gesso, no matte medium, just, and I stuck it down and covered a whole page. This is in my play journal.
Yeah.
The writing the letters took a little bit longer, but it was such a reminder. This says take a moment to play, and I need to look at this regularly because it's so easy to get caught up in that thinking that you've got to take forever, and actually you don't. And the other thing which helps with making time is, I don't know if other people have this, maybe they do. If you're doing more than one thing, like you're doing a collaboration and you're doing a 100-day project and you're doing your season of play and you're doing and your daily art, all these different things, it's kind of easy to get in a traffic jam where none of the cars can get through. So another way to find time is to be a traffic officer, put the cars to the side and just let one car through and just do one thing. And then you have time again. It just clears up the time. So in a way, finding time, you just need 5 minutes. And in a way, the rest of the work is sort of clearing your head so that can happen.
Well, I was going to say, putting 5 minutes in primes the pump. You get that 5 minutes and then you're like, oh, I've freed up this mental space, so I can now spend 15 doing something else.
Absolutely.
So that's what's really amazing to me, is when I do get in that mindset of I don't have time to do this, which is funny because my full-time job now is being a creative person, right? Like that's my job, like literally. And so to say I don't have time to create seems bizarre, but it happens. You do get, it's very much like a traffic jam where you just have so many things. And I keep a bullet journal, and that helps me sort of plan out my day. And some days I have to get a few things checked off before I can be creative. And then some days I'm like, okay, I know I have this list to do. I know I'm going to get through it, but I'm going to take the time on the front end to be creative. And that will help me sort of be in a better mental space to get through the grindy things that I need to do. So yeah, it's learning to balance that is interesting and tricky, but any 5 minutes, like any 5 minutes that you can carve out, which I mean, who's not looking at their phone for 5 minutes? Like, turn it off.
I mean, and if you've ever downloaded one of those apps that actually tells you how long you're spending.
I've never done it. I don't want to know.
Don't do it. Don't do it, Misty. I did it and I had to delete the app because I couldn't take actually seeing the truth. I was like, no more truth, no more truth. So yeah, don't do it. And the other thing I would say is, if you've got your normal routine that works, but then busyness means that that's not possible, try something different. So for example, I normally make art during the day, but during this last month, I've been busy and traveling and whatever. So I've been doing my 100-day project just before I go to bed. I'd never normally do that, but actually it's been really nice. It's been a bit like my bedtime story. I just happen to be writing the bedtime story, but that's also another way into finding time, is just shake things up a little, do something at the bus stop, just do something different.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. Well, we're going to wrap up. Divyam, it's just been so delightful to talk to you and hear more of your story. And I just love getting to chat with you so much. And so I appreciate you spending the time today.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been really, really lovely.
And I think we're going to go to the Hangout next. So Kaylee will post that and we'll all switch over to hanging out together.
Fab. Thank you so much, Misty.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.